The stagecoach driver found her slumped against a snow-covered boulder 3 miles outside Fort Worth, Texas. Her lips blue as cornflowers and her fingers stiff as iron in the January cold of 1878. And if he had arrived 10 minutes later, she would have been nothing more than another nameless grave on the frontier. Xavier Quentin heard the commotion from his cabin halfway up the mountain, before he saw the cluster of townspeople gathered around the general store. He had ridden down from his ranch to pick up supplies, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air that had descended upon North Texas with unexpected fury. The blizzard had swept in from the north 2 days prior, blanketing the usually mild landscape in 8 inches of snow and ice, trapping travelers and livestock alike in its merciless grip. "Someone get Doc Morrison," a woman's voice cut through the January wind. Xavier dismounted, tying his horse to the post outside Henderson's general store. His boots crunched through the snow as he approached the gathering crowd. "What happened?" he asked, his deep voice causing several heads to turn. "Stage driver found a woman near frozen to death on the North Road," said Tom Henderson, the store owner. "Looks like she got separated from something, maybe another coach that broke down. Nobody knows who she is or where she came from." Xavier pushed through the crowd and saw her then, wrapped in every blanket the townspeople could spare, shivering so violently that her teeth chattered like castanets. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with delicate features that spoke of Eastern refinement. Dark hair, damp from melted snow, clung to her forehead and cheeks. She appeared to be in her early 20s, perhaps 23 or 24 at most. "Doc Morrison is out at the Campbell Ranch delivering a baby," someone said. "Won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest." "She needs warmth now, not tomorrow," Xavier said, stepping forward. "My cabin is close and has a good fire going. I can take her there." Several women in the crowd exchanged glances. Martha Brennan, the banker's wife, spoke up. "That wouldn't be proper, Mr. Quentin. An unmarried woman staying at your cabin alone. She will die if she stays in this cold," Xavier replied firmly. His gray eyes, hard as flint, swept across the crowd. Anyone else offering their home? The silence that followed answered his question. Most families in Fort Worth were already cramped in their small houses, struggling to keep warm themselves. The hotel had closed for the winter after the owner moved to Dallas. "I will go with them," said Mrs. Chen, the elderly Chinese woman who ran the laundry. "For propriety. I can help care for her." Xavier nodded gratefully. He scooped the young woman into his arms, startled by how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. She murmured something incoherent, her eyes fluttering but not quite opening. "My wagon is here," he said to Mrs. Chen. "Get your things quickly." Within 15 minutes, they were headed up the mountain path toward Xavier's cabin. The young woman lay in the wagon bed, wrapped in blankets with hot stones from Henderson's stove tucked around her. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, monitoring her breathing while Xavier drove the team through the snow. Xavier Quentin was 27 years old, tall and broad-shouldered from years of ranch work. He had come to Texas 5 years earlier from Montana, buying a small ranch in the mountains outside Fort Worth where he raised cattle and horses. He kept to himself mostly, coming to town only when necessary. Some folks said he was running from something in his past, but Xavier never spoke of it, and eventually people stopped asking. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow, solid and welcoming with smoke curling from its stone chimney. Xavier had built it himself, log by log, making it larger than a single man needed because somewhere deep inside he hoped that someday it might house a family. The main room held a massive fireplace, a kitchen area, and comfortable furniture he had crafted through long winter nights. 2 bedrooms branched off the main space, and a loft provided additional storage. He carried the woman inside and laid her on his own bed, the largest in the house. Mrs. Chen immediately took charge, ordering Xavier to bring more wood for the fire and heat water for tea. "She needs dry clothes," Mrs. Chen said, examining the woman's damp garments. "These wet things will kill her as surely as the cold outside." Xavier retrieved one of his flannel shirts and some wool socks from his dresser. Mrs. Chen shooed him from the room, and he retreated to the main area, stoking the fire until it roared with heat. He prepared hot broth from the beef bones he had simmering for his own dinner, adding vegetables and herbs. An hour passed. Then Mrs. Chen emerged periodically to report that the woman's color was improving, that her shivering had decreased, that she had woken briefly and taken some water. "She spoke a few words," Mrs. Chen said, accepting a cup of coffee from Xavier. "Her name is Penelope Walsh." But she was confused, not making much sense. Kept asking about a brother. Was she traveling with family? I do not know. She fell back asleep before I could ask more. Mrs. Chen studied Xavier with her sharp, dark eyes. "You have a kind heart, Mr. Quentin. Not many men would take in a stranger like this. Not many Christians would leave someone to freeze," Xavier replied simply. It was near midnight when Penelope Walsh truly woke. Xavier was dozing in a chair by the fire, his long legs stretched out before him, when he heard Mrs. Chen's voice calling softly from the bedroom. He rose quickly, moving to the doorway. The woman in his bed was sitting up slightly, propped on pillows, her eyes open and alert. They were remarkable eyes, he noticed, a deep green like the pines on his mountain in summer. She looked from Mrs. Chen to Xavier, confusion and wariness mingling in her expression. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You are safe," Mrs. Chen said gently. "This is Mr. Quentin's cabin outside Fort Worth. The stage driver found you frozen on the road. Do you remember what happened?" Penelope closed her eyes, and Xavier saw tears squeeze from beneath her lids. "The coach wheel broke," she said after a moment. "We were traveling from Dallas. The driver said he would ride ahead to get help, told us to wait in the coach and keep warm. But there was not enough wood for the fire, and the cold kept getting worse. My companion, an older woman named Mrs. Hartley, she fell asleep and would not wake up. I tried to wake her. I tried so hard, but she was so cold." A sob caught in her throat. "I thought if I could walk, if I could find help, maybe I could save her. But the snow was so deep and I could not see anything. I just kept walking until I could not walk anymore." "Mrs. Hartley," Xavier said quietly, "was she traveling with you from where?" "From Philadelphia," Penelope whispered. "She was hired by my brother to accompany me to Texas. He owns a ranch near here, or so his letters said. The Carter Ranch." Xavier felt his stomach tighten. He knew the Carter Ranch, or what was left of it. "Miss Walsh, when did you last hear from your brother?" Something in his tone made her eyes snap to his face. 3 months ago. He wrote that he had established a successful cattle operation and wanted me to join him here. He sent money for my passage. Why? What is wrong?" Xavier glanced at Mrs. Chen, then back to Penelope. There was no gentle way to say it. "There was a fire at the Carter Ranch 6 weeks ago. The house burned. James Carter died in that fire." The color drained from Penelope's face. "No," she breathed. "No, that cannot be true. James is all I have left. Our parents died last year of influenza. James came west to make a new start for us both. He cannot be dead." "I am very sorry," Xavier said, meaning it deeply. The grief in her eyes cut him like a blade. "The sheriff investigated, but the fire appeared to be an accident. A lamp overturned, they think." Penelope turned her face away, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Chen moved to comfort her, but Xavier could see there was no comfort to be given for such news. The young woman had traveled 2,000 miles to a new life, only to lose her brother and find herself completely alone in a harsh, unforgiving land. "Rest now," Mrs. Chen murmured. "You are still recovering. Tomorrow will be time enough to think about what comes next." But Xavier was already thinking about it. Penelope Walsh had no family, no money beyond what she might have carried with her, and no prospects in a town where women had few options. She could perhaps find work as a schoolteacher or a seamstress, but those positions were scarce and poorly paid. The winter had months yet to run, and she had nowhere to go. He returned to his chair by the fire, staring into the flames as the wind howled outside. In the bedroom, he could hear Mrs. Chen's soft voice speaking in Mandarin, words that sounded like prayers or blessings. The cabin creaked and settled around them, snow piling against the windows. Xavier thought of his own journey west, of the reasons he had left Montana. He had been engaged once, to a banker's daughter in Helena. But she had ultimately chosen a lawyer over a simple rancher, preferring the comforts of town life to the isolation of a mountain ranch. The betrayal had stung less than the realization that he had never truly known her heart. He had come to Texas seeking not just new land but a new beginning, though he had long since resigned himself to facing that beginning alone. Now there was a woman sleeping in his bed who had lost everything. A woman whose strength had driven her to walk through a blizzard trying to save someone else. A woman whose eyes held depths of feeling that stirred something in Xavier's chest he thought had gone dormant. He shook his head sharply. Such thoughts were foolish and inappropriate. She was grieving, vulnerable, and dependent on his charity. The last thing she needed was a rough cowboy entertaining romantic notions. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Xavier woke to find Mrs. Chen already preparing breakfast, the smell of frying bacon filling the cabin. He had fallen asleep in the chair, his neck stiff from the awkward position. "She is sleeping peacefully," Mrs. Chen said, anticipating his question. "The rest is good for her. Her body has been through a terrible ordeal." Xavier nodded, rising to tend to the livestock. Outside, the world was a pristine white expanse, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. He broke ice in the water troughs, fed the horses and cattle, checked that the barn was secure. The cold bit through his heavy coat, making his fingers ache even in thick gloves. When he returned to the cabin an hour later, Penelope was awake and sitting at the table, wrapped in one of his blankets. She looked impossibly small in his large shirt, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Mrs. Chen had given her tea and bread, though she seemed to have little appetite. "Mr. Quentin," she said as he entered, her voice stronger than the night before. "I must thank you for saving my life. I am told I would have died if not for your kindness." "The stage driver found you," Xavier said, removing his coat and hanging it by the door. "I just provided a warm place to recover." "Do not diminish what you did," Penelope replied, meeting his eyes directly. "You took in a complete stranger when others would not. That speaks to your character." Xavier felt heat rise to his face, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "Any decent person would have done the same, perhaps, but it was you who did." She paused, her fingers tightening around her teacup. "Mrs. Chen told me more about my brother this morning, about where he is buried. I would like to visit his grave when I am strong enough." "Of course," Xavier said. "The cemetery is in town. When the weather clears enough for safe travel, I will take you there myself. And then I suppose I must find work," Penelope continued, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "I have some experience as a teacher. I taught at a small school in Philadelphia for 2 years. Perhaps Fort Worth needs a teacher. The schoolhouse burned down last fall," Mrs. Chen said gently. "They are building a new one, but it will not be ready until spring." Penelope's composure wavered for just a moment before she reinforced it with visible effort. "Then I will find something else. I can sew, I can cook, I can keep books. Surely someone needs help." Xavier poured himself coffee, thinking carefully about his next words. "Miss Walsh, you are welcome to stay here until you are fully recovered and have made proper arrangements. There is no rush for you to leave. I cannot impose on your hospitality indefinitely, Mr. Quentin. It is not an imposition. The cabin is large, Mrs. Chen is here as chaperone, and you need time to heal and grieve. At least stay until the worst of the winter passes." Penelope studied him with those penetrating green eyes, as if trying to discern his motives. Xavier kept his expression neutral, though something in her gaze made his pulse quicken in a way that was entirely unwelcome given the circumstances. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." "You are someone who needs help," Xavier replied simply, "and I have help to offer. It is as simple as that." But it was not simple, and they both knew it. Still, after a long moment, Penelope nodded. "Very well. I accept your offer with gratitude, but I insist on earning my keep. I can cook and clean, help with whatever work needs doing." "You can help Mrs. Chen with the indoor chores once you are stronger," Xavier agreed. "For now, just rest and recover." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope's strength returned gradually, color blooming in her cheeks as the warmth and good food did their work. Mrs. Chen stayed for a week before returning to her laundry business in town, satisfied that Penelope was well enough and that Xavier was a gentleman who could be trusted. Left alone together, Xavier and Penelope navigated their shared space with careful politeness. He rose early to tend the ranch, often before she woke. She prepared meals and kept the cabin clean, despite his protests that she should rest. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Xavier learned that Penelope had grown up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a bookshop owner. Her childhood had been filled with reading and learning, her parents encouraging an education unusual for women of the time. James had been 7 years her senior, protective and ambitious. When their parents died, he had decided to seek his fortune in Texas, planning to send for Penelope once he was established. "He wrote such wonderful letters," Penelope said one evening, staring into the fire. He described the wide open spaces, the sunsets that lasted forever, the sense of possibility. He said Texas was a place where a person could truly start fresh, be whoever they wanted to be. Her voice caught. "He sounded so happy. I never imagined I would arrive only to learn he was gone." "He would have wanted you to find that fresh start anyway," Xavier said quietly. "To build the life he envisioned for you both." "Perhaps," Penelope murmured. "But it is difficult to imagine building anything when I feel so unmoored. Everything I knew, everyone I loved is gone. I am adrift in a strange land." Xavier understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. "Texas has a way of giving people what they need, even if it is not what they expected," he said. "I came here 5 years ago running from disappointment. I thought I wanted to be alone on this mountain, isolated from the world, but the truth is, isolation is not the same as peace." Penelope looked at him curiously. "What changed?" "Nothing until recently," Xavier admitted. "I think I was just existing, not living. Going through motions without purpose beyond surviving another season. And now," he met her eyes across the firelight, and something passed between them, an understanding too deep for words. "Now I am reminded that life is more than mere survival. That sometimes unexpected arrivals bring unexpected blessings." Penelope's breath caught audibly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she rose abruptly, murmuring about needing to check on the bread dough rising in the kitchen. Xavier watched her go, his heart pounding in a way it had not since he was a young man courting his first love. 2 weeks after Penelope's arrival, the weather cleared enough for travel to town. Xavier hitched the wagon, and they made the journey down the mountain in bright sunlight that turned the snow-covered landscape into a glittering wonderland. Penelope wore one of Mrs. Chen's dresses, altered to fit her smaller frame, and a heavy cloak Xavier had purchased from Henderson's store on a previous trip. The cemetery sat on a small hill overlooking Fort Worth, its wrought iron gates stark against the white snow. Xavier led Penelope to James Carter's grave, marked by a simple wooden cross. Someone, probably Tom Henderson, who served as the unofficial town undertaker, had carved the name and dates neatly into the wood. Penelope stood before the grave for a long time, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. Xavier stayed back, giving her privacy for her grief. The wind whispered through the bare branches of the oak trees scattered throughout the cemetery, a mournful sound that seemed fitting for the moment. Finally, Penelope spoke, her voice carrying to where Xavier stood. "I am sorry I was not here, James. Sorry you died alone. But I promise I will make the life you wanted for us. I will stay in Texas and find my purpose here, just as you found yours. I will not let your sacrifice be meaningless." She knelt and placed her hand on the frozen ground, whispering words Xavier could not hear. When she rose, her face was composed, resolute. She walked back to Xavier with her head high, though her eyes were red from weeping. "Thank you for bringing me," she said. "I needed to say goodbye properly." They visited the general store next, where Tom Henderson greeted them warmly. News of Penelope's arrival and recovery had spread through town, and several people stopped to offer their condolences about her brother and their relief that she had survived her ordeal. "Heard you were staying at Xavier's place," Tom said casually while measuring out flour for Xavier's order. "Folks think it is mighty decent of him to take you in." "Mr. Quentin has been extraordinarily kind," Penelope replied evenly, though Xavier noticed the slight stiffening of her spine. She was clearly aware of the impropriety of their situation, even if necessity had dictated it. "Still, might be more proper for you to stay at Mrs. Chen's," Tom continued, his tone making it less a suggestion than a statement. "Small town like this, people talk." "People always talk," Xavier said, his voice carrying an edge. "Miss Walsh is a guest in my home, under my protection, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me." Tom held up his hands in a placating gesture. "No offense meant, Xavier, just looking out for the lady's reputation." "My reputation is my concern," Penelope interjected firmly. "And I assure you, Mr. Quentin has behaved with complete propriety. I owe him my life, and I will not have anyone question his honor or mine." Her defense of him stirred something fierce and protective in Xavier's chest. They completed their purchases in silence and returned to the wagon. As they drove out of town, Penelope spoke without looking at him. "I should find other lodgings. I do not want to cause you trouble." "You are not causing me trouble," Xavier said firmly. "You heard Tom. Mrs. Chen has no room and there is nowhere else suitable for you to stay. Besides, I meant what I said. You are under my protection, and I do not care what the gossips say. But your reputation, my reputation, is that of a hermit who lives on a mountain. I do not think having a house guest will damage that significantly." Despite herself, Penelope laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed her face. Xavier found himself wanting to hear that laugh again, to see that sparkle in her eyes. "You are a stubborn man, Xavier Quentin," she said, using his first name for the first time. "So I have been told, Penelope Walsh," he replied, matching her informality. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of friendship, of trust, of a connection growing despite the propriety that said a single man and woman should not spend so much time alone together. The weeks that followed saw winter's grip slowly loosen. February brought warmer temperatures and the first signs of thaw. Penelope settled into life on the mountain ranch as if she had always been there. She proved to be an excellent cook, transforming Xavier's simple fare into meals that made him look forward to evenings at home. She organized his chaotic bookkeeping, revealing a sharp mind for numbers and business. She even helped with the animals when Xavier would allow it, though he was reluctant to let her do heavy labor. They talked for hours during those long winter evenings. Xavier told her about Montana, about his family who still ranched there, about the fiancé who had broken his heart. Penelope shared memories of her parents, her childhood in Philadelphia, her dreams of adventure that had seemed foolish until fate forced them upon her. "I used to read novels about the frontier," she confessed one night, mending one of his shirts by lamplight. "Romantic stories of brave pioneers and dramatic adventures. My mother said I had an overactive imagination." "And now you are living in one of those stories," Xavier observed from where he was oiling his saddle. "Yes, though the reality is both harsher and somehow more wonderful than the novels suggested." She bit off the thread and held up the shirt, examining her handiwork. "In the books, everything is dramatic gestures and grand declarations. But real life is quieter. It is mending shirts and sharing meals and learning someone's habits. It is the way you always drink 2 cups of coffee in the morning and how you check the windows twice before bed to make sure they are secure." Xavier looked up, startled that she had noticed such small details about him. "You are very observant." "So are you," Penelope replied, meeting his gaze. "You know I am frightened of storms because you always come inside when thunder starts. You remember I prefer honey in my tea instead of sugar. You split extra kindling on cold nights so I do not have to struggle with the larger logs." She paused, color rising in her cheeks. These small kindnesses matter more than any grand gesture could. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feeling. Xavier set aside the saddle and crossed to where she sat. He knelt before her chair, bringing them eye to eye. "Penelope," he said, her name feeling like a prayer on his lips. "I need to tell you something, even though the timing is probably wrong and you may not want to hear it." Her green eyes widened, but she did not look away. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," Xavier said simply, the words emerging with more ease than he expected. "I know it has only been 6 weeks. I know you came here in tragedy and you are still grieving. I know every reason why this is complicated and probably unwise. But I would be lying if I did not admit what I feel." Penelope's hands trembled where they held the mended shirt. "Xavier, you do not have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I am not asking for any response. I just needed you to know that you are not alone here, not just a guest or someone I am helping out of obligation. You have become important to me, more important than I probably should admit." "Why should you not admit it?" Penelope asked softly. She set the shirt aside and reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek with a tenderness that made his breath catch. "Why should either of us pretend we do not feel what is growing between us? Then you—" "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for your help and confusing gratitude with deeper feelings. But it is not gratitude alone. It is the way my heart lifts when I hear your footsteps on the porch. The way I feel safe here with you, in a way I have never felt anywhere else. The way I catch myself imagining a future I had not dared to hope for." Xavier covered her hand with his where it rested against his face. I know it is too soon to speak of marriage, of futures. But when you are ready, when enough time has passed that it feels right, I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I want to court you properly, Penelope. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Tears glistened in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. "I would like that very much," she said. "And perhaps it is too soon by society's standards, but we are not living by society's rules anymore. This is Texas, a place for fresh starts and new beginnings. If we feel what we feel, why should we deny it?" "I do not want you to feel pressured," Xavier said seriously. "You have been through so much trauma and you are dependent on me for shelter and safety. I never want you to feel obligated to return my feelings." Penelope's expression turned fierce. "Xavier Quentin, listen to me very carefully. I am not a fragile flower who cannot distinguish between gratitude and love. Yes, I am grateful to you, but I would be grateful to anyone who saved my life. What I feel for you is entirely separate from that gratitude. When I imagine my future now, you are in it. Not because I owe you, but because I want you there." The certainty in her voice convinced him as nothing else could. Xavier rose, drawing her to her feet, and wrapped his arms around her. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked beneath his chin, her arms encircling his waist. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet cabin while the fire crackled and the night pressed close around them. "I will remember you for all my days," Xavier murmured into her hair, the words emerging from some deep place in his soul. "From the moment I saw you frozen and forgotten, brought back from the edge of death, I think some part of me recognized you, recognized that you were meant to come into my life." Penelope pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I arrived here with nothing, knowing no one, having lost everything. I should have been terrified, and I was. But then there was you, offering safety and kindness without asking anything in return. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, to keep hoping. I will remember you for all my days too, Xavier. For every day we are given together." He kissed her then, gently at first, asking permission with the brush of his lips against hers. She answered by rising on her toes, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, deepening the kiss with a passion that matched his own. It was a kiss of promise, of hope, of two wounded souls finding healing in each other. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably be more careful," he said, though he made no move to release her. "The last thing you need is more scandal." "Let them talk," Penelope said recklessly. "I am tired of living by other people's rules and expectations. My whole life has been defined by what was proper, what was acceptable. And where did it get me? Alone and frozen in a snowstorm, headed toward a future that no longer existed. Maybe it is time to write my own story instead of living the one others have written for me." Xavier smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Then write it with me. We will make our own rules, build our own life." "Yes," Penelope agreed, smiling back at him. "Yes, that is exactly what we will do." March arrived with warming temperatures and the first green shoots pushing through the melting snow. Xavier began preparing for spring planting and calf birthing season. Penelope helped where she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life with the same determination she had applied to everything else. She accompanied him to check on the cattle one particularly beautiful morning, riding the gentle mare Xavier had chosen for her. The mountain landscape was emerging from winter, brown and gray giving way to hints of green and gold. Wildflowers were beginning to bloom in sheltered valleys, and birds returned with cheerful songs. "It is beautiful here," Penelope said, reining her horse beside Xavier's at the top of a ridge overlooking his property. "I understand why you chose this place. It is peaceful, Xavier agreed. Or it was. You have thoroughly disrupted that peace, Penelope Walsh. She looked at him in alarm until she saw the teasing glint in his eye. Have I? Absolutely. I used to be content with silence and solitude. Now I find myself rushing through my morning chores so I can get back to the cabin and talk with you. I used to think the mountain was enough. Now I know it was just incomplete without the right person to share it with. Penelope urged her horse closer until their legs were nearly touching. I am glad I disrupted your peace then. You disrupted mine first after all. Did I? You made me feel safe when I thought I would never feel safe again. You made me laugh when I thought I would never smile again. You made me hope when I thought hope was lost. That is the most thorough disruption possible. They rode back to the cabin hand in hand where the terrain allowed it, and Xavier found himself thinking about the future in concrete terms. He began planning improvements to the cabin, expansions that would make it a true family home. He thought about the cattle operation and how to expand it profitably. He thought about children someday, sons and daughters who would grow up on this mountain, learning to love the land as he did. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in the kitchen, Xavier brought up something that had been on his mind. "Have you thought about when we should marry?" he asked, trying to sound casual while his heart hammered nervously. Penelope paused in slicing vegetables, a smile playing at her lips. "Are you proposing, Xavier Quentin?" "I suppose I am, though not very romantically. I should probably get down on one knee with a ring." "I do not need grand gestures," Penelope reminded him. "But I would like to hear the question asked properly." Xavier wiped his hands on a towel and turned to face her fully. He did not kneel, they were past such formalities, but he took both her hands in his and looked into her eyes with all the sincerity he possessed. "Penelope Walsh, will you marry me? Will you share this mountain with me, build a life with me, grow old with me? I do not have much to offer beyond a comfortable home, honest work, and a heart that is completely yours. But what I have is yours if you want it." "You have everything I want," Penelope replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, Xavier. Yes, I will marry you. I cannot imagine anything I want more." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, until they were both dizzy with it. The vegetables lay forgotten on the counter as they held each other, celebrating the beginning of their new life together. "When?" Xavier asked when they finally resumed making dinner, both grinning like fools. "Soon," Penelope said decisively. "I see no reason to wait. We know what we want. Let's not let propriety or tradition delay our happiness any longer." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Worth. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, along with Tom Henderson, who had been thoroughly won over by the obvious love between the couple. The preacher seemed somewhat hurried about the whole affair, clearly concerned about the propriety of a woman marrying a man she had been living with for months, but Xavier and Penelope did not care. Penelope wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen and several other women from town had helped her make. Xavier wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed. He could not take his eyes off his bride as she walked down the aisle toward him, her face radiant with happiness. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, and Xavier felt time slow as the familiar words washed over him. This was real. This remarkable woman was choosing him, choosing this life, choosing to stay in Texas and make it her home. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Xavier tensed slightly, half expecting someone to raise concerns about the rushed timeline or improper living arrangements. But the church remained silent except for the rustle of clothing and a few quiet sniffles from emotional onlookers. "I do," Xavier said firmly when asked if he would take Penelope as his wife. "I do," Penelope replied with equal certainty when asked the same. They exchanged simple gold bands that Xavier had ordered from a jeweler in Dallas. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. A small reception followed at Henderson's General Store, the largest indoor space in Fort Worth. The townspeople had come together to provide food and drink, their way of welcoming Penelope into the community and celebrating the marriage. Xavier was surprised by the warmth of their congratulations, having kept himself so separate from town life for so long. "You are good for him," Tom Henderson told Penelope as they cut the simple cake Mrs. Chen had baked. "Xavier has been alone too long, too closed off. You have brought him back to life." "He saved my life," Penelope replied, smiling at her husband across the room. "It seems only fair that I help him live his more fully." As the afternoon sun slanted through the store windows, Xavier and Penelope said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the ride back up the mountain. They were both quiet, not from lack of words but from an abundance of feeling that did not need words to express. "Mrs. Quentin," Xavier said as they reached the cabin, testing out the sound of her new name. "I like the sound of that," Penelope replied, her eyes sparkling. "Though I confess I am nervous." "About tonight?" Xavier asked gently, helping her down from the wagon. "A little," she admitted. "I have never, that is, I do not have experience with." Xavier cupped her face in his hands, stroking her cheeks with his thumbs. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly. "There is no rush, no expectations. Tonight and every night we will only do what feels right for both of us. I love you, Penelope. Your comfort and happiness matter more to me than anything else." She relaxed visibly, rising to kiss him. "I love you too, and I want this, want you. I am just grateful to have married a patient man." "I will be as patient as you need," Xavier promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. That night in the bedroom that was now truly theirs, they came together with tenderness and care. Xavier was gentle with his bride, attentive to her needs and responses, making sure her first experience of intimacy was as wonderful as he could make it. Penelope responded with a passion that delighted him, her initial shyness giving way to genuine pleasure. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Penelope traced patterns on Xavier's chest with her fingertips. "That was nothing like what the other women told me to expect," she murmured. "What did they tell you?" Xavier asked, amused. "That it would be uncomfortable, something to endure as a wife's duty. That men only took pleasure from it while women merely submitted." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her hair falling in a dark curtain around them. "They were very wrong." Xavier laughed, a deep, genuine sound that rumbled through his chest. "I am glad to hear it, and I promise it will only get better as we learn each other." "I look forward to that learning," Penelope said, blushing even as she smiled wickedly. Their first year of marriage passed in a blur of work and joy and growing love. Spring brought new calves and the planting of crops. Summer brought long, warm days perfect for riding through the mountains together. Xavier taught Penelope to rope and brand cattle, to read the weather, to track animals through the forest. She proved an apt student, throwing herself into ranch life with enthusiasm. They worked side by side mending fences, harvesting vegetables from the garden Penelope had planted, preserving food for the winter. In the evenings, they sat on the porch Xavier had expanded, watching the sun set over the Texas landscape and talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Penelope said one evening in late summer. "I know it is early in our marriage, but I think about it often. I want to fill this cabin with life and laughter." "I want that too," Xavier agreed, pulling her close against his side. "How many do you imagine?" "At least 3 or 4. I was lonely as an only child, especially after James left. I want our children to have siblings, to never feel alone the way I did." "Then we will have as many as you want," Xavier said, kissing the top of her head. "We have time and a home large enough to accommodate a large family." By October, Penelope knew she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening as they prepared for bed, nervous about his reaction despite their conversations about wanting children. "Are you certain?" Xavier asked, his face transformed with wonder. "As certain as I can be. I have missed my courses, and I feel different somehow. Dr. Morrison confirmed it this afternoon when we went to town." Xavier swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "You have made me the happiest man alive, Penelope Quentin." "I am happy too," she said, though tears streamed down her face. "But I am also frightened. What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother?" "You will be an excellent mother," Xavier assured her. "And nothing will go wrong. You are strong and healthy, and Dr. Morrison is experienced. We will take every precaution, and by next spring we will have a baby to love and raise together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Penelope remained active, helping with ranch work until Xavier finally put his foot down and insisted she rest more. He became fiercely protective, constantly worrying about her health and comfort. "I am not made of glass," Penelope protested when Xavier tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know that, but you are carrying my child, and I will not take any chances with either of you." Despite her protests, Penelope secretly loved his attentiveness. She had never been cared for with such devotion, such single-minded focus on her well-being. It made her feel cherished in a way that went beyond romance. They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Xavier built a beautiful cradle from cedar wood, carving delicate designs into the headboard. Penelope sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had not yet met. On a cold February night, nearly a year to the day after Xavier had found her frozen and forgotten on the side of the road, Penelope went into labor. Xavier sent for Mrs. Chen and Dr. Morrison, then stayed by his wife's side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths as the contractions intensified. "I am here," he murmured over and over. "I am not going anywhere. You are doing wonderfully." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Xavier felt helpless, able to do nothing but offer comfort while Penelope endured pain he could not ease. He prayed more fervently than he had in years, bargaining with God to keep both his wife and child safe. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, a baby's cry filled the cabin. Dr. Morrison held up a squalling, red-faced infant, announcing, "It is a boy, a big, healthy boy." Xavier felt tears stream down his face as the doctor cleaned and wrapped his son. Penelope lay back against the pillows, exhausted but smiling. Mrs. Chen worked efficiently, cleaning and caring for the new mother while Dr. Morrison placed the baby in Penelope's arms. "Look at him," Penelope whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Xavier, look at our son." Xavier moved to sit on the bed beside his wife, staring down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had stopped crying, his dark blue eyes open and seeming to study his parents. Xavier touched one tiny fist with a careful finger, amazed when the baby's hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Xavier said, his voice choked with emotion. "Penelope, you are amazing. You did so well." "We did well," she corrected, leaning against his shoulder. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, narrowing their choices down to a few favorites. Looking at their son now, Xavier knew which name felt right. James, he said quietly. James Xavier Quentin after your brother, so he can carry on the name and legacy. Penelope began to cry, touched beyond words. Yes, she managed. That is perfect. James would be so honored. They spent the rest of the day marveling over their son, taking turns holding him, counting his tiny fingers and toes. Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Chen stayed for several hours to ensure both mother and baby were stable before departing with instructions for care and promises to check on them the next day. As evening fell and they were finally alone, Xavier sat in the rocking chair he had made, holding his sleeping son while Penelope rested in bed. He looked from the baby to his wife, feeling so much love he thought his chest might burst from it. A year ago you arrived here frozen and forgotten, he said softly. Now look at us, a family, a life neither of us imagined but both of us want. I remember that night, Penelope said sleepily, waking up in your bed so confused and frightened. Seeing you standing in the doorway, tall and strong and kind, I thought I had died and you were an angel sent to guide me to heaven. Xavier chuckled. I am many things, but an angel is not one of them. You were my angel, Penelope insisted, my guardian who saved me when I was lost. And now you have given me this beautiful life, this perfect son. I could not ask for more. I will give you more, Xavier promised. I will give you a lifetime of love and happiness. I will fill this cabin with the children you wanted. I will grow old beside you, grateful every single day that fate brought you to my mountain. Our mountain, Penelope corrected with a smile. This is my home now, Xavier, not because of the place, but because of you. Wherever you are is home. Those words settled into Xavier's heart like a benediction. He rose carefully and placed baby James in his cradle, then went to Penelope. He kissed her gently, reverently, trying to convey without words everything he felt. Rest now, he murmured. I will watch over both of you. Always watching over us, Penelope said, her eyes already drifting closed. My mountain cowboy, I will remember you for all my days, Xavier. For every precious day we are given together. The years flowed past like a gentle river, each one bringing new joys and challenges. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's serious nature. 2 years after his birth, Penelope gave Xavier a daughter they named Grace. She was a bright, laughing child who wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Another son, Daniel, arrived 3 years later, completing their family. The cabin rang with children's laughter, with the sounds of growing and learning and living. Xavier expanded the house twice to accommodate their growing family, adding rooms and a larger kitchen, a proper dining area. The ranch prospered under Xavier's careful management and Penelope's sharp business sense. They acquired more land, expanded their cattle operation, and became well-respected members of the Fort Worth community. Xavier was even elected to the town council, though he still preferred the peace of his mountain to the bustle of town. On warm evenings, the family gathered on the porch Xavier had built, watching the sun set over Texas. The children played in the yard while Xavier and Penelope sat in rocking chairs, hands linked between them, counting their blessings. You ever regret it? Xavier asked one such evening when the children were older, James nearly 10, Grace 8, and Daniel 5. Staying here instead of returning east, you could have gone back to Philadelphia, started over there. Penelope looked at him with such love in her eyes that Xavier felt his breath catch, even after all their years together. I have never regretted it for a single moment, she said firmly. This is my life, Xavier. You are my life. Those children playing in the yard are my life. I would not trade it for anything. Not even for the culture and civilization of the East, especially not for that, Penelope laughed. I have everything I need right here. Do you regret finding me that day, taking on a frozen, forgotten woman who turned your peaceful life upside down? It was the best decision I ever made, Xavier replied seriously. You brought light into darkness, Penelope. You gave me a reason to live instead of just exist. Every single day with you has been a gift. They sat in comfortable silence, watching James help Grace build something with sticks while Daniel dug in the dirt with fierce concentration. The mountains stretched around them, solid and eternal, witness to their love and their life. Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Xavier and Penelope stood on their porch looking up at the stars. The sky was brilliantly clear, the Milky Way a glowing river across the darkness. I was thinking about that first night, Penelope said, leaning against Xavier's chest as his arms wrapped around her from behind. When I woke up in your cabin, so lost and afraid, you told me you would remember me for all your days. Do you remember saying that? I remember every word of that night, Xavier confirmed. And I meant it then, and I mean it now. You are written on my heart, Penelope. Every moment we have shared, every joy and sorrow, every ordinary day and extraordinary event, all of it is precious to me. I feel the same, Penelope said softly. I arrived here frozen and forgotten with nothing and no one. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose, a love deeper than I ever imagined possible. I will remember you for all my days, Xavier Quentin. For all my days and into whatever comes after. Xavier turned her in his arms so they stood face to face in the starlight. He kissed her with the same passion and tenderness as their first kiss, as their wedding kiss, as every kiss they had shared through their years together. Come inside, my love, he murmured against her lips. Let us remember tonight together too. They went inside their cabin, their home, built of logs and love and determination. Behind them, the Texas landscape stretched dark and beautiful, holding their story in its ancient bones. The mountain had witnessed Penelope's arrival, frozen and forgotten, that terrible January day. It had watched Xavier whisper his promise, watched their love grow and deepen. It had seen their children born, their family flourish, their life unfold in all its ordinary, extraordinary glory. And it would continue to watch, bearing witness to the enduring love between a mountain cowboy and the woman he had saved, the woman who had saved him in return. Their story was one of many on the frontier, yet unique in its particulars, precious in its details. Years continued to pass in their mountain paradise. The children grew, learning the ways of the ranch, absorbing their parents' values of hard work, kindness, and devotion. James became an expert horseman, serious and responsible like his father. Grace developed her mother's love of learning, often found with her nose in a book when she should have been doing chores. Daniel combined the best of both parents, equally comfortable working cattle or solving mathematical problems. When James turned 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Xavier and Penelope watched their eldest fall in love with the same wonder they had experienced, seeing their own story reflected in the nervous excitement of young romance. Were we ever that young? Penelope asked Xavier one evening after James had ridden off to visit his sweetheart. We were younger, Xavier reminded her. You were only 24 when we married. I was barely 27. It feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once, Penelope mused. So much has happened, yet the feelings remain so fresh. They were in their early 40s now, still healthy and strong from the demands of ranch life. Silver threaded through Xavier's dark hair, and lines of laughter and sun marked Penelope's face. But to each other they remained as beautiful as their wedding day. James married his sweetheart in a joyful ceremony that brought both families together. He and his bride built a small house on the northern edge of the ranch, beginning their own chapter while remaining part of the family operation. A year later, they made Xavier and Penelope grandparents with the birth of a daughter. "We are grandparents," Penelope said in wonder, holding her tiny granddaughter for the first time. "When did we get old enough for that?" "We are not old," Xavier protested, though he felt the weight of years more keenly when confronted with a new generation. "We are experienced." Grace left for college back east at 19, determined to become a teacher like her mother had once been. It broke Penelope's heart to see her daughter leave, but she understood the need for young people to find their own paths. Grace wrote faithfully every week, sharing her adventures and studies, promising to return to Texas when her education was complete. Daniel stayed on the ranch, showing a natural gift for the business side of the operation. He helped Xavier modernize their practices, introducing new breeding techniques and better record-keeping systems. By the time he was 20, he was essentially running the day-to-day operations, freeing Xavier to slow down and enjoy his later years. As they entered their 50s, Xavier and Penelope found themselves with more time to simply be together. The frantic pace of raising children and building a ranch had eased. They took long rides through the mountains, revisiting places that held special memories. They sat on their porch for hours, talking or reading or simply enjoying the peace. "I want to show you something," Xavier said one spring morning when Penelope was 52 and he was 55. He led her on horseback to a spot high on the mountain she had never visited before. They dismounted in a meadow filled with wildflowers, a breathtaking view of the valley spread below them. Xavier pulled a wooden box from his saddlebag and handed it to Penelope. "What is this?" she asked, puzzled. "Open it." Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon. Penelope recognized her own handwriting on some, Xavier's distinctive script on others. "I saved every letter we wrote each other," Xavier explained. "The ones you sent from town during your visits to Grace when she was at the school there. The ones I wrote when I had to travel to market. Every word we committed to paper I kept." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes as she carefully lifted the letters. "Xavier, this is beautiful." "I thought we could read them together," he said, settling onto a blanket he had spread on the ground. "Remember where we have been, everything we have built together." They spent the afternoon reading letters aloud, laughing at inside jokes and tender declarations, marveling at how their love had remained constant even as everything else changed. Some letters were practical discussions of ranch business. Others were passionate declarations of love and longing. All of them were threads in the tapestry of their shared life. "Listen to this one," Penelope said, unfolding a page dated from their 5th year of marriage. "You wrote, 'I miss you every moment you are away. The cabin feels empty without your laughter, the bed too large without you beside me. Come home soon, my love. Our children need their mother, and I need my wife, my partner, my heart.'" "I remember writing that," Xavier said, pulling her against his chest. "You had taken Grace to Dallas to see a specialist about her cough. You were gone a week, and it felt like a year." "And I wrote back," Penelope said, finding the corresponding letter. "I miss you too, beyond words. But I carry you with me always, in my heart and thoughts. Soon I will be home, and we will never take for granted the blessing of simply being together." They read until the sun began to set, until they had revisited years of their life through words preserved on paper. When Xavier finally tied the letters back together and returned them to their box, both he and Penelope felt the weight of their history, the miracle of their enduring love. "I want to be buried here," Penelope said suddenly, looking around the meadow. "When my time comes, bring me to this spot. It is beautiful and peaceful, and we will have this memory attached to it forever." Do not speak of dying, Xavier said, though he understood the impulse. They were not young anymore. Death was no longer an abstract concept but an approaching reality. We have years yet. I know. But I want you to know my wishes, and I want to know yours. Here then, Xavier agreed. We will rest here together, overlooking the land we made our own, the life we built from nothing. They stayed until the stars emerged, holding each other and making quiet promises about the years remaining to them. When they finally rode back to the cabin in the moonlight, they carried with them a deeper appreciation for every day they were given together. More years passed, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows. Grace returned to Texas with a husband, a scholar she had met in Boston. They settled in Fort Worth, where Grace opened a school for girls, fulfilling her dream of educating the next generation. Daniel married and had 3 children in quick succession, filling the ranch with noise and energy once again. Xavier and Penelope became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family. They hosted holiday gatherings that brought everyone together, the cabin bursting with grandchildren and in-laws and love. They told stories of the old days, of how the ranch started, of the blizzard that brought Penelope to Texas. Tell us about when you first met, the grandchildren begged, never tiring of the romantic tale. Your grandmother arrived frozen and forgotten, Xavier would begin, his voice still strong despite his advancing years. The coldest winter in Texas history, or so it seemed to me. The stage driver found her collapsed in the snow, more dead than alive. And Grandpa saved you, the children would prompt, knowing the story but loving to hear it repeated. He did more than save my life, Penelope would answer, smiling at her husband with eyes still bright with love. He gave me a reason to live. He showed me what home really means. And Grandpa always says he will remember you for all his days, the oldest grandchild would recite. What does that mean? Xavier would reach for Penelope's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. It means that from the moment I met your grandmother, she became the most important person in my world. Every day with her is a gift I treasure. When I think of my life, every memory worth keeping has her in it. The grandchildren would sigh with satisfaction, and the adults would exchange knowing glances, recognizing the rare and precious love their parents and grandparents shared. As they entered their 60s, age began to slow them both. Xavier's joints ached on cold mornings, and Penelope's eyesight weakened, requiring reading glasses. But their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven through decades of shared life. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching yet another spectacular sunset, Penelope spoke quietly. I have been thinking about that night again, the night you found me. You think about it often, Xavier observed gently. I do, because it was the night my real life began. Everything before seems like a dream, like it happened to someone else. But everything after, every moment with you, has been vivid and real and precious. I know what you mean, Xavier said. I was merely existing before you came, just going through motions day after day. You woke me up, reminded me what it means to truly live. We have had a good life, have we not? Penelope asked, though she knew the answer. The best life, Xavier confirmed. Better than I ever imagined possible. 3 beautiful children who have grown into remarkable adults. Grandchildren who bring us joy. A ranch that prospers. But more than any of that, I have had you beside me every step of the way. That is the true blessing. I used to wonder why fate brought me to Texas in such a terrible way, Penelope mused. Why I had to lose James, nearly die myself, arrive with nothing and no one. It seemed so cruel. But now I understand that sometimes the hardest journeys lead us to the most beautiful destinations. I had to lose everything to find what really mattered. Me, Xavier said simply. You, Penelope agreed. Us. This life we built together from nothing but determination and love. They sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. The mountains settled into evening, the sounds of the ranch fading into peaceful quiet. When my time comes, Xavier said slowly, I want you to know that I have no regrets. Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile. Do not speak of leaving me, Penelope said, though her voice lacked conviction. They were old now, and death was not a distant possibility but an approaching certainty. I cannot imagine this life without you. You will not have to, Xavier promised. We will go together when the time comes. One right after the other, so neither of us is alone for long. It was not a realistic promise, but it comforted them both nonetheless. They sat holding hands as the stars emerged, counting their blessings and remembering their journey. Xavier's prediction proved eerily accurate. He passed away in his sleep on a cold January night, exactly 45 years after he had first found Penelope in the snow. Penelope woke to find him gone, his hand still holding hers, his face peaceful. The grief threatened to destroy her. For days she could barely function, moving through the funeral arrangements in a fog of pain. The family gathered around her, offering support and love, but nothing could fill the void Xavier's absence created. They buried him in the meadow he had shown her years before, the place with the breathtaking view and the wildflowers. The entire community came to pay respects to a man who had been respected and loved, who had built something lasting. Penelope stood at the graveside, her children and grandchildren surrounding her, and spoke the words only she could say. I will remember you for all my days, Xavier Quentin, for every precious day we were given together, and for all the days I have remaining until we meet again. You are my guardian angel, my love, my home. Wait for me, my darling. I will come to you soon. She lasted 3 months without him. The doctor said her heart simply gave out, worn down by grief and age, but her family knew the truth. Penelope had died of a broken heart, unable to bear life without the man who had been her everything for 45 years. They buried her beside Xavier in the meadow, and carved both their stories on a single headstone that stood where they had read love letters decades before. The inscription read, Xavier Quentin and Penelope Quentin, beloved husband and wife, devoted parents and grandparents, she arrived frozen and forgotten. He remembered her for all his days together, forever in love and peace. The years moved on. The ranch continued under Daniel's capable management, then passed to James's oldest son. Grace's daughters became teachers like their mother. The family grew and branched, but they never forgot the story of Xavier and Penelope, the love that had started it all. Generations later, great-great-grandchildren would visit the meadow where Xavier and Penelope rested side by side. They would read the inscription and hear the stories of the blizzard, the rescue, the love that transformed 2 broken people into something whole. The cabin still stood, carefully preserved, a testament to what could be built with love and determination. Visitors walked through it, imagining the family who had filled these rooms with laughter and life. They saw the cradle Xavier had carved, now displayed in the main room. They saw Penelope's sewing basket, her books, Xavier's tools and saddles. But more than the physical objects, they felt the love that permeated every log and beam. A love that began on a frozen January day when a mountain cowboy found a dying woman and chose to save her. A love that grew through adversity and challenge, that weathered storms both literal and figurative. A love that lasted until death and beyond, becoming legend and inspiration. On cold January nights when the wind howled around the mountain, old-timers in Fort Worth swore they could see two figures on horseback riding through the meadow where Xavier and Penelope were buried. They appeared young and strong, untouched by age or illness, riding side by side through the wildflowers that never seemed to die in that special place. Whether truth or fancy, it was a beautiful image. Xavier and Penelope, together for eternity, still exploring their mountain, still building their love story day by day, still remembering each other for all their days, which had now stretched into forever. The mountain stood eternal witness, holding their story in its ancient heart. The story of how love could transform tragedy into triumph, how two souls could find each other against all odds, how a single act of kindness could echo through generations. She had arrived frozen and forgotten, with nothing and no one. He had been a lonely cowboy on a mountain, going through the motions of life without truly living. Together, they became more than the sum of their parts. They became a love story for the ages, proof that even in the harshest circumstances, even when all seems lost, love can bloom and flourish and endure. Their family continued to gather every January at the meadow, marking the anniversary of that first meeting. They brought flowers and stories, tears and laughter. They remembered not just Xavier and Penelope, but the legacy they left behind, a belief in the power of love, the importance of kindness, the value of choosing hope over despair. And deep in the earth of that Texas meadow, beneath the wildflowers and the weathered headstone, Xavier and Penelope rested together. United in death as they had been in life, remembered for all the days their family gathered, their story retold until the words became sacred tradition. She had arrived frozen and forgotten. He had whispered that he would remember her for all his days, and he had kept that promise as she had kept hers to him. They had remembered each other through decades of joy and sorrow, through the raising of children and the building of legacy, through every sunrise and sunset on their mountain. And now they were remembered by all who came after, their love story preserved not just in words but in the very land they had claimed as their own. The Texas mountain held their memory, the cabin sheltered their legacy, and the family they created carried their love forward into future generations. It was, in the end, exactly what they had both wanted. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but a life built together day by day, moment by moment, choice by choice. A life that mattered because they had lived it together. A love that endured because it was real and deep and true. The mountain cowboy and the woman he saved. The frozen stranger and the man who gave her warmth. Xavier and Penelope Quentin, whose love story began with a blizzard and ended only when death claimed them both, releasing them to whatever comes after, together as they had always been. Their story was complete, their ending perfect in its simplicity. They had loved and been loved. They had built something lasting. They had remembered each other for all their days, and now they were remembered by all who came after. And that, in the end, was the truest happily ever after anyone could hope for.